All right, make sure that you pause me as we go so that you can write down any of those important parts that we just spoke about into your notes. So, one, a strong yet balanced government. In 1789, Benjamin Franklin wrote, "Our new Constitution is now established and has an appearance that promises permanency. But in this world, nothing can be said to be certain except death and taxes." Franklin's words were prophetic, but they also sounded a note of caution. While our constitutional government has survived for more than 2 centuries, there is no guarantee that it will continue to endure, since its survival depends on our upholding the nation's founding principles. The framers of the Constitution worked hard to create a political system that would last. They wanted a government that was strong enough to govern, but not so strong that it endangered citizens' freedoms. They also wanted ordinary Americans to understand and support the Constitution. For this reason, they organized it very carefully. So that paragraph right there talks about some things that we've already spoke about in previous chapters. Something that's strong enough to govern, but not something that will cause people's freedoms to be at risk. Um, this next part, I want you to really consider how they discuss the Constitution. It's 3 parts, so you might want to consider something like a chart or maybe a diagram for this. Like maybe draw a couple of circles. That's called a web. Maybe that would be a helpful way to organize it. Another thing you could do is a flow chart. I'll add a document that shows you what that looks like. So, the Constitution has 3 parts. The first part, the preamble, describes the purpose of the document and the government it creates. The second part, the articles, establishes how the government is structured and how the Constitution can be altered through amendments. The third part, the amendments, includes the Bill of Rights and other changes to the Constitution. So take a moment and write your notes on that. I hope you're pausing. The preamble establishes the purposes of the government. A preamble is an introduction explaining the purpose of a document, typically a legal document. The preamble to the Constitution begins with the phrase, "We the people." These words announce that the Constitution's authority is based on the people themselves, and that the power to form the government did not come from an existing government or the states or a supreme being. "We the people" echoes the idea in the Declaration of Independence that governments should derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. The next phrase in the preamble, "in order to form a more perfect union," demonstrates the framers' determination to improve upon the government established under the Articles of Confederation. They wanted the Union of States to become stronger so that the states would collaborate and cooperate rather than argue among themselves. We talked a lot about the debate between how much power states should have and how much power the nation should have. So be considering that as you think about that part. The rest of the preamble lists goals for the new government. The framers wanted to establish justice by creating a government that would establish and enforce fair laws that applied equally to all people. They aimed to ensure domestic tranquility. In this phrase, domestic refers to internal affairs of the nation. By ensuring domestic tranquility, the framers hoped to establish a country of peace and order. They also wanted the government to provide for the common defense, the protection of the country as a whole against foreign enemies. The framers wanted the United States to have a society and an economy that helped people thrive and prosper. So they declared that the government should promote the general welfare. They also wanted to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. By posterity, they meant future generations. The framers understood that achieving these goals required a powerful central government. However, they recognized that the Constitution must also place restrictions on that government's powers. Oh, your screen probably jumped back up to the top. I wanted to take a moment to note this picture here. It says underneath it, The preamble to the Constitution sets certain general goals for the government, one of which is to establish justice. The Supreme Court is the highest authority in matters of justice. The 9 Supreme Court justices hear cases in that room. All right, I jumped down to the next picture. This says the government should also provide for the common defense. Here, midshipmen from the U.S. Naval Academy walk in formation. And here's the last picture. Another goal for government is to promote the general welfare. This includes providing funds for public works, such as this bridge in Boston. Okay, now we've jumped down to the articles define the powers of government. Make sure you're pausing me as we go and taking important notes on people, places, anything that's highlighted. And if something is being described in full, make sure you take note of that. So the Constitution has 7 articles. The first 3 describe the structures and powers of the 3 parts of the government: the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. This would be a good place to set up a chart or a table. Some people like a flow chart. So again, I'll have that example attached next to this video. Dividing the government into 3 branches sets up a strong central government while also distributing power. The system of checks and balances ensures that no single branch becomes too powerful. Each branch can limit the power of another. For example, the president can veto a bill, but the bill can still become a law if 2/3 majority of Congress votes to override the veto. In this example, the executive branch checks the power of the legislative branch, which then checks the power of the executive branch. To give another example, when the Supreme Court rejects a law as unconstitutional, it is checking the power of the legislative and executive branches. Additionally, checks and balances extend to the appointment of key officials. For example, the President's nominations of Supreme Court justices are subject to the Senate's approval. Okay. Through the system of checks and balances, Congress maintains the power to impeach and convict the President, Vice President, and any civilian official of the United States. To impeach an official is to charge that person with an offense committed while in office. Although only the House of Representatives can vote to impeach, to accuse an official of committing what the Constitution calls treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors, only the Senate can convict. If the Senate votes by a 2/3 majority to convict, the official is removed from office. 2 presidents have been impeached, but neither was convicted. And before I move on, we want to think about, in our past, we've heard a lot about impeachment. So think about the things that you know and what you heard and apply that to what you're reading right now. That's a very, very helpful method of comprehending material like this. The Constitution does not only distribute power among the 3 branches of the national or federal government. As you will see, it also divides power between the federal government and state government. So this is showing us constitutional checks and balances. Legislative checks on executive branch. They can override presidential vetoes, approve or reject presidential appointments and treaties, and they can impeach and try the president. That's the legislative branch. Okay? The executive branch checks on the judicial branch. They can nominate Supreme Court justices and federal judges. The judicial branch checks on the legislative branch. They can declare laws unconstitutional. Then we end up back at the legislative branch again. That's the Senate and the House. So let's go back through here. It looks like the legislative checks on the judicial branch as well. They can approve or reject nomination of federal judges, create lower courts, and remove judges through impeachment. The judicial checks on the executive branch. They can declare treaties and executive acts unconstitutional. Appointments are for life, and judges are free from executive control. The executive checks on the legislative branch. They can approve or veto bills, call special sessions of Congress, and recommend legislation. Provisions for checks and balances are a key feature of the Constitution. Checks and balances help prevent any one branch of government from wielding too much power. Make sure you go back through and take any notes that you need from this section.